All good.
Great. Hey, g'day. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for that intro, James. I just want to take a moment to recognise our traditional custodians. We at Wild Mountains acknowledge that they are a part of the oldest living culture on this earth. I want to pay my respects to the Turrbal people whose land we are on at the moment. And I also want to recognise the Midginberry tribe of the Yugambeh language group, who are the traditional custodians of where I am from. But before I go on, I just want to give you a heads up on the structure of today. This is a group workshop and I have a great set of slides prepared, and I'm passionate about plastic pollution. And I hope to share some strategies around this. But hopefully this is going to be an interactive space. And in a few moments, I'm going to check in with you for why you may have come to this talk. And then somewhere about the middle, just to make sure you're all still with me, I'm going to check in again and see if they've got any questions. And then again, I don't know who we've got in the room, but I imagine there's some experience around plastic pollution in the room. Oh, no, maybe a little bit. Awesome sauce. And you might like to share some experience at the end. How does that sound? Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, and the last slide, I've got a link tree so that everything that I talk about today is all up there, and also my contact details. So if anybody's got any questions at the end or they want to get in touch, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me then. So let's get into it. Is there any questions that anybody has, or is there anything particularly about plastics that you're curious about or want to find out about? Should I bring you a microphone? Yes. Oh, there's a second one. Oh, so fancy.
Yes, I'm interested in, I've just been learning a little bit about fungi and you know how it's been proven to eat the plastic. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Hey, awesome. Well, if I don't cover it in the slides today, let's bring it back up again at the very end.
I want to understand more about all of the new packaging that we're seeing that says like biopack, like it's a different kind of plastic, but is it really? So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I can help with that. There's some great questions, and I hope that we'll get through some of them through the presentation. And if we've got time at the end, we can go into some depth around those things. Firstly, I'm going to start with, where I'm from. This is a great idea from Mary Graham, and I also pay my respects to Michelle Maloney for introducing me to this idea. But this is a special place called Wild Mountains. Wild Mountains for over 30 years has endeavoured to inspire the community to connect with nature. It backs onto the Border Ranges, which is a national park and is a buffer forest to the farmland below. We also support the headwaters of Camp Creek. Oh, I just pressed a button that I shouldn't. Whoopsie daisies. Community help. Thanks, Kim. That makes sense. Cool. So we're also keep the headwaters of Camp Creek weed free that feeds into the Logan Albert caption. We run programs for the Earth Institute called around Earth Education. Our main one is Earth Keepers. And on behalf of Wild Mountains in 2017, I went to Sydney, where I was looked at this amazing thing we call plastic. What's it doing in our bodies, in our homes, on this planet? I listened to a story of Rebecca Price-Roots, who was the founder of Plastic Free July. And she talked about, remember we're going back, she started her journey as a grassroots movement in Western Australia on the impact of single-use plastics, which is what we'll talk about, that packaging in a wee while, which is now culminated in that movement called Plastic Free July. I was so blown away by her ideas that I came home and I pioneered a series of Plastic Free July workshops alongside a Plastic Free July passport book. Yeah, which I've handed a few of those out. Rebecca started her talk with the rising use of single-use plastic. Remember, we're going back about 5 years, when this idea of you know, a plastic island in the middle of our oceans visible from space was newsworthy, and nobody could actually believe that that could possibly be a thing. She talked about how she started avoiding using single-use plastics with water bottles, plastic bags, takeaway coffee cups, and plastic straws. She talked about how other people in her office started noticing these things, and with her friends and family, it got the ball rolling. But all the time that she was talking and in our ongoing discussions, she saw plastic pollution as a gateway issue to the problem of waste. And that waste was also part of a bigger, broader discussion of the climate emergency we're facing, where in the last workshop, we just learned where climate emergency came from. That was pretty exciting. And those links from plastic to waste to our impact on climate made a lot of sense to me in that interconnectivity. She also had another clear message that has taken me years to unpack, and probably most of you guys would know, is that change needs to start with ourselves. Like, alongside systems change, you know, we need to make sure that businesses become more responsible, that the government set frameworks and policies so we can use plastic in a circular fashion instead of a linear one. But we also need to check in with our own living on the planet lightly. I'm sure many of you, a great individual action you guys are taking today is deepening your understanding of plastics and the systems that it's embedded in, because it can be quite insidious. And the more that I looked at plastic, the more I went, oh my Lord. But it's also just another material, and it's something that we can look at together. I'm sure many of you are across the simple steps that we need to take in preparation to avoid common, convenient, single-use plastics. And before I do a quick run through of the history of plastics, let me bring into focus some of the amazing Australian groups that are working together in this area to reduce plastic pollution, create positive outcomes for plastic life cycles, and shift legislation. My favorite is Boomerang Alliance. I think they've just done phenomenal work in talking to governments, talking to communities, raising awareness of this issue of plastic pollution. And because of that, we've now seen legislation in phasing out single-use plastic bags from 2018 in Queensland. And also in Queensland, as of September 1st this year, was a ban on plastic straws, plastic cutlery, and plastic takeaway containers, although Big W hasn't really taken much notice yet. And in Victoria, we now see a ban on mass release plastic helium-filled balloons, which is pretty awesome. This happened because lots of people made small changes and concerted effort. Together, we can make a collective difference. And Plastic Free July has contributed to this change, where last July in 2020, an estimated 326 million people pledged to not use single-use plastics in 177 different countries. Blows my mind. Right. Next, we're going to go through a quick history of plastics, partly because I think it's a great way to get our heads around the complexity of plastic pollution, and also to see it situated culturally. But it's 10 slides, and I think I've got it down to 2 minutes. Ready? Cool bananas. So plastic is a polymer. It's a molecular structure built up of a large number of similar units all bonded together. There's evidence that the first polymer was made in the 16th century out of bone. Other organic polymers were also made from wood and grain stalks in the late 18th century. And in 1869, a US inventor, John Wesley Hyatt, created celluloid, which is a mixture of nitrocellulose and camphor. These were for billiard balls. I think it's really, what I've got up here isn't billiard balls. My husband plays a lot of snooker and he reminds me that these are not billiard balls. And he had a fantastic image for me that I haven't put up. But if you ever meet Justin, you go, I understand that pool balls and billiard balls are different. Yeah, beautiful. Now, he made this mixture of this organic polymer out of nitrocellulose and camphor as an alternative to the traditional ivory that the balls used to be made of. But then we hit our first synthetic polymer with Leo Baekeland creating Bakelite in 1907. Plastics developed really quickly after this, with polyethylene and polystyrene in the 1920s, and following with nylon for fabric in the 1930s. In the 1950s, we saw plastic as a healthy, modern, fashionable way of life. Polyester was introduced in the 1950s, and polyethylene, or polypropylethylene, pardon me, today the most used polymer in the world, got its kickoff in 1954 as a commodity. In the 1970s, plastic is ubiquitous, but we start to see concerns for human health and the rise of plastic pollution here. Recycling is raised as a solution in this sort of time, and also bioplastics emerged in the 1980s, and they just failed commercially. So we didn't pay too much attention to them after that. Also, the resin index was created, the resin identification code. In a different talk, we could discuss further on how different qualities of these plastics in regards to human health and safety, but it is a very large subject. So we'll move on from that. What is interesting with the RIC is the symbol on an item, moving away from the podium, as the symbol on the item doesn't indicate the fact that it's recyclable. So it'll have a little triangle with a little rectangle. Doesn't mean that you can recycle that. What it means is it's referring to the different state or the difficult chemical compound that's behind the plastic. So you've got 1 to 6, which are really clearly defined plastics. And then you've got this great number. It's number 7. And number 7 is those hundreds of other plastics that have been recycled and created. And there's lots of different ideas around the use of those. This is because we've been starting to add different types of phthalates, making plastic more durable, flexible, and transparent. We've also added other things like biphenyl A, which has got a lot of media cover, called BPA, to make it more moldable and soft. By the 2000s, plastics everywhere, from mobile phones to satellites, from our toilets to our electricity cables, from the clothes we wear to the couches we sit on. Plastics also has found its way inside our bodies through willful means, like the pacemaker that drives my granny's heart, or the artificial knee joints that my stepdad's can now walk, or he can walk because of them, all the way to, unwillingly, as researchers found microplastics in human waste in 2018. So out of oil, gas, and plants, plastic falls into 2 big groups. It falls into a thermoplastics, which are the polymers that can be remelted and recast almost indefinitely, as long as they're kept pure. And the most common types of thermoplastic are your polypropylene and polyethylene. Think your water bottles, think your medical supplies, think your car parts, or toys. The second set is your thermoset plastics. These don't melt when they're reheated, and they cannot be remade easily. Think car tires, think the insides of your fridges. The history of the production and history of plastics is the history of convenience and disposal. We need to shift this conversation. We need to shift this linear conversation into a conversation around responsible product life cycles in a circular or donut economic process. Whew. I'm going to take a breath. My notes say so. A lot of information to digest there, I think. At this point, in what we've just talked about, is there any clarity that I can offer or anything you want to explore further?
I just wanted to know, with the 2 different plastics, the ones that can melt and the ones that can't.
Yep.
So with the ones that can't, there's no way to recycle them, or what happens to them? They just go into landfill?
At the moment, yeah, they just go into landfill. But you can also see that we're doing different things with tires. You know, there's a group called Replast down in South Australia that has made them into marine bolsters, but they've also failed commercially, which I think is really interesting. So we're experimenting with different ways, but the actual plastic itself is going to be that piece of plastic, and that isn't going to want to then bond to another piece of its own self. You know, so car tires, as they break down, they release a lot of gas. You know, they're oil. Tires are also made of a mixture of things like rubber from plants, as well as a whole heap of petrochemicals. So those thermoset plastics, that's just what they are. And we can break them down or chop them up, and then we can use more plastic to adhere them to a different type, and they can be a texture. They're also used a lot as fillers in industry, but no, they can't be recycled.
And just one more question, if everyone's okay. Great. So I've heard of this technology also, that you can actually make plastics or do something with it. There's like a technology that takes them back into its oil form, or it's, you know, like wow. It's, I don't know. Have you heard of that before?
No, I haven't heard of a successful use of that before.
Okay.
I have heard of people trying to make plastics back into its constituent parts, but you probably need just as much energy as you did to make it as you would to unmake it, I would imagine, or even more, and then you wouldn't be really sure what you got. So it comes from oil, gas, or plants. So you'd be making it back into a plant. You know, you'd be making it back into the gas, you'd be making it back into the oil. I imagine that it would make it back into something different. And maybe with the thermosets or the plastics that can't be remelted, they might make it so that you can do something pliable with it. But that may also be just currently what we do with our thermoplastics, which is we remelt them and then we add phthalates, bisphenol A. And, you know, those are only 2 of hundreds of thousands of chemicals that people are playing with. And then remembering every time that we burn, because, you know, a lot of our plastics go into incinerators, we get dioxins and we get a whole heap of really nasty stuff that comes along with that. We just don't understand how those different types of plastics mix together. So while the big 4 single-use plastics are great conversation starters, I want to talk about something a bit more exciting and positive. We created that school program and we wanted to go a bit deeper with the conversation. So we developed 4 workshops that work alongside the Plastic-Free July passports. And this was so that we could offer opportunities to have really meaningful discussions around the way that plastic is used in our society in a positive light. Because I think that every part of our plastic pollution challenge has got solutions to it. And our first one was nude food. I did these workshops in libraries, at school tuck shops, all over the place. And this workshop highlights what is safe and stable plastic, because a lot of people don't understand that there are some plastics that are toxic, even in today's age. Not burning them, not doing anything, but there's a lot of people that don't recognize the dangers of plastics in our bodies. So the food grade plastics, and we also got kids to identify the soft plastics, plastic packaging, which are one of those hundreds of new plastics that have emerged. We look at the resin index. We talk about plastic in our oceans and the effect it has on animals, how it accumulates in our food chains. But then we also put it into perspective as we examine other plastics that we ingest from everyday items. We play that guessing game of what stick do we stick in our mouths every day on purpose. And we also discuss, finally, food waste, because even if we have the most eco-friendly packaging, food waste is still 40% in this country. 40% of the food grown in this country goes into food waste, and we'd still continue to have that problem. This is a group having achieved their pledges of living more lightly on the planet. because I think that it's really nice, you know, after they work really hard to commit to living more lightly on the planet idea, reducing their energy on materials. And I think that's a way that our kids can also help make substantial change, or they can see that how that they can make change. Slow clothing is my next favorite workshop. I first heard of these ideas through a great woman called Jane Milburn. She's a Brisbane-based author, and she's actually written a book called Slow Clothing. Slow clothing is the antithesis of fast fashion. And here we get a chance to talk about the ethics and sustainability of garments. Slow clothing thinks about the creative and sustainable ways to enjoy the everyday items we wear while minimizing our material footprint on the world. It's about also having a basic understanding of what materials are, you know, the natural fibers of cotton, wool, bamboo, versus the synthetic fibers of nylon, organza, polyester, polypropylene. It's also looking at the disposable nature of garments in fast fashion and the long-term consequences of this. In class, we light a few garments on fire to think more deeply about the impact of these and the consequences of these garments in our lives. We also make t-shirt bags, and we think through and brainstorm different ideas on the use and reuse of the garments in our lives. I'd just like to do a shout out to some great people, and particularly one lady, Zahul Calvin Mills, and her team, who has put together Eco Fashion Week. Following on from this, we also look at Ban the Bag workshop. While many people think that this is not a necessary thing, oh, my slide. So behind the symbol of Australia, where all our heads are, we've got New South Wales in bright red. Can I move this?
Do you want me to move it?
Yeah, I think yeah, here we go. Let's see if we can move this.
Just from the black.
Aha.
Perfect.
Yeah. My cute kid with a recycle stamp. He was gorgeous. So while everyone goes, well, was ban the bag? Haven't we been and done with that? I still think there's a long way to go with the concept of banning the bag. Once again, I come back to Boomerang Alliance, a national organisation lobbying for changes around plastic pollution. And also Boomerang Bags, who provided the solution of post-consumer waste fabrics and making bags out of those instead of using single-use plastic bags. And they originated down on the Queensland coast in Burleigh Heads, which is pretty awesome. And they've been instrumental in this legislative change. But this is only a ban for lightweight single-use plastics. And we all saw the immediacy of the heavyweight plastic bags that came through. Ultimately, this workshop is around product life cycle. Oh, there you go. I'll move that back where it was. It's around product life cycle. It's around talking about the way the product is used throughout its life, or even introducing that concept that things come from somewhere, you use them, and then they go to somewhere as a product life cycle. And using a plastic bag, which takes millions of years to create and is used for approximately, they reckon, 12 minutes and then is disposed of. And that really resonated with our school kids. We try and identify in the classroom what is made of plastic and what isn't. Can anybody see anything in here that's not made of plastic? You know, the fake facade of the wood. Glass, yeah, that's a great one. You know, but our clothes, our carpets, our panels for lining, our paints, which is okay.
Our paints?
Yeah, most paints have plastics in them. And we talk around how we value plastic, you know, and how we value our communities and how we value our futures with our kids. And they're fantastic discussions. And lastly, we round out this whole workshop series with Take 3 for the Sea, and look to embody that idea of what I do changes the world. And what I do has effect on other people. What I do can ripple out. So it's important what I do. Is what we try and take into this. And it's, you know, take 3 for the sea, take 3 for the trees, but ultimately it's around collective responsibility and individual action. Take 3 for the Sea is a group that was started about a decade ago, and it's simple as taking 3 pieces of rubbish when you leave the beach, a waterway, bush, or anywhere, and knowing that you've made a difference. And we go into some great discussions around if this does make a difference and why with our students. We also show that most of the plastic pollution that flows onto Australian shores has come from Australia. So it's not that it's washing in from other countries, it's the fact that it's come from the Australian mainland and it's gone in a little eddy around the island and come back, which is generally revolutionary for our kids. And the top 4 things that you should share with your kids or your neighbours' kids is that there's no such thing as a way. And if you Google Story or Stuff, or it's on the link tree, it's about a 20-minute video that just explains it so clearly and explains why it's important that we care that there's no such thing as a way, and how how we can use that to govern our everyday lives. Secondly, that everything is interconnected. You can't do just one thing, and that's that principle of what I do changes the world. I reckon thirdly, understanding product life cycles. Once you can really comprehend, where did this come from? How do I want to use it? And how am I going to responsibly dispose of it afterwards? And whose responsibility is that? I think it's important. And lastly, but mainly, get into nature. In my experience working with adults and kids in the bush for over a decade, nature heals, nature calms, nature inspires awe. And I think it's something that we should all get into. Rebecca was clear that it was those 4 simple everyday items with which you could start a conversation about plastics. Plastic Free July may never come to pass, but it makes one heck of a conversation starter. From our kids, I've had responses to Plastic Free July like, "Ooh, that's really interesting," all the way to as if. And I think that I truly believe that what I do changes the world. And as long as we move forward with that, I think we've got lots of different ideas that we can use towards plastic pollution. But in terms of a wellbeing economy, another type of conversation that I started that I'm working on are offers and needs markets from the Post-Growth Institute. I've been running offers and needs markets for uni students, and I've had similar responses. "Oh, that's really interesting," all the way to as if. And what I find that happens in these different types of marketplaces and situations is that we pivot around our sense of value, how we value things, how we value ourselves, and rethinking how we differently present exchange of value for the benefit of our communities. And on Sunday, I'll take, if you can join us in person, I'll take you through a facilitated process of offers and needs markets and explore that relationship of value and rethink what exchange can look like. In a different setting, I might say, look around you at the wealth of knowledge that's in this room. But I actually honestly believe that, who knows what's in this room and what we can discover together. And if you're unable to join me for tomorrow's workshops, but would still like to have a conversation around offers and needs markets or plastics, please do get in touch via phone or email. Thank you. So to answer a little bit more around bioplastics, they are still experimental. Often there's a precinct down in Sydney at the Sydney Harbour that has the compost biodegradable reused plastics, but they need to go into an industrial composter. So they don't work if you just put them in your own backyard compost. They do work, but they need high temperatures that you can only get when you've got all of it together. So the answer to that is, yes, they do work, but we need some really clear understanding of the types of situations. And we need to do that collectively. We need to separate our food waste and our bioplastics into one area and look at how that's all going to work together. In regards to microplastics and different fungi, I think my first reaction to that, I've read a lot of those papers, is what a waste. You know, when we're thinking about plastic is made from natural gas and oil and sometimes plants, but mainly natural gas and oil. And we're losing that captured sunlight energy. And there was only one period in history where that sunlight energy was laid down, that fossilized sunlight energy that turns up in coal or oil, and we've now dug it out of the ground. It was, you know, there for a long time, has taken millions of years to come into existence. It's amazing, you know, the things that we can do with it. I was earlier today listening to Rethinking Value, and I really think that that's what we need to do with plastics. We need to rethink that type of value. And if we're going to let a whole bunch of fungi or, you know, microbes eat it, well,
what you got against fungi?
Oh, fungi. I've got my hands on a lot of fungi. But yeah, I think that may, if we come to a decision that plastic pollution is really an issue and we really need to get on top of it, we have got lots of different mechanisms that we can get to it rather than releasing something into the environment that eats it. Cane toads spring to mind. You know, I've just been, you know, really thinking around biological controls, and I just don't think we're smart enough yet. There's a great group called Ocean Cleanup that goes and collects plastics in nets and brings it back and recycles it. I think that's a lot more positive outcome than putting research dollars into finding out how we can eat it. But that is just my opinion. There is a lot of good things happening out there. Does anybody else have any other comments? Do you want to stand up and have a stretch? I was going to get you to do that halfway through, but I wasn't sure.
Sorry, stupid question. So
all questions are great.
This one might be stupid. The bioplastic ones, like the top of our lunch packs and stuff.
Yep.
Which bin does that go in?
That should be. That's a complex question to ask. It's like, how do we recycle this? I know that it can be done, but how do we recycle this pointer? And the answer is that if QUT has got a mechanism of collecting them and taking them to an industrial composter, they should go in that bin. And if they go into the organic waste bin, then I would imagine that QUT should have some links with an industrial composter, and that's where it should go. But it cannot be recycled with other plastics as it'll contaminate that. And that's something that's really difficult when we come to recycling plastics, which is why we've introduced phthalates. Phthalates, which are those bunch of chemicals that help it be transparent, moldable, flexible.
I'm just thinking I know that you're part of Regen Brisbane, and it made me think about do you know of any existing services that do that? Like, you know, say for instance, UQ, they are collecting all the bioplastics. Is there a service that takes the bioplastics to is there an industrial composter in the city or around?
I haven't looked at an industrial composter in Brisbane. I know there's one in Sydney. I know there's not one in Melbourne. So I wonder if there is one in Brisbane. They're different. You can also get lower grades of composting. Eventually, it will break down in a composting bin, but it just doesn't release it effectively, and it's just not as available. And it's not good for your soil. So I wouldn't.
Oh, isn't it? No, really?
It makes, don't quote me, I think that Johnny Palmer said that it makes it more acidic.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But you have to have tons. You have to have tons. You think in ratios and stuff. But I think that would be a really good thing to find out. What I am interested in is soft plastics. So soft plastics are able to be recycled through a thing called Red Group in Queensland and most of Australia. And Red Group have done some amazing work. It was a mum who just went, we've got to make sure that we capture these single-use plastics, and they've got bins at Woolworths and at Coles, which I think are a really great place to start.
So pre and post 1st of September, when Queensland banned plastics, what change have you seen?
I live on
because
top of a mountain.
I don't know if I've seen.
I have seen,
Yeah.
I came down and I was like, wow, everyone's had a change of heart. And then I was like, oh, actually, no, that's probably the legislation. Businesses can be fined up to $4,000 per offence for providing plastic straws, plastic cutlery, or polystyrene takeaway containers. It doesn't mean that they're not going to supply, you know, little plastic containers, but they're deemed as not single use. They're like plastic takeaway containers. They're deemed as recyclable because they should be number 5. They shouldn't be number 1. Number 1 has got some really serious health effects when it heats up. Yeah, but and I have noticed that I thought everybody was just being really trendy. But I'm like, no, there's legislation now. Yeah, so I've seen some big changes. Also, my $2 shop in, you know, Bodez, it's a huge place. We've got 2 sets of lights. There's a $1-2 shop. And I went in there and they just had all paper plates, bamboo cutlery, and I thought they were being trendy. And now I realize that, yeah. But Big W is currently going, oh no, people still want to buy it. They're not selling it. They're not using it. So they're putting an argument that it's consumer's choice.
So I have a lot of guilt involved with the lunch I had today.
Yeah.
It's just unpacking that
Yeah.
was like the cling wrap and everything. It's not gone. So I don't know. Is it going to change that a bit more, or is that legal now? That cling wrap that we had, the lid that we had.
Besides that cling wrap and that film of plastic across the top, it's all technically compostable. And then you can take the cling wrap and you can take that piece of film out and you can take that to Redbubble. Sorry, not Redbubble, that's a t-shirt company, Red Group at Coles or Woolies.
And the reason why it was done that way is because of COVID as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an unfortunate decision. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to touch on that guilt, you know, it can be really damning and you're like, oh, can I even breathe? We can only do what we can do right in this moment. And we can think about the changes we might like. And some of them are going to be really practical and really doable. And others of them, you know, for me, getting an electric car, you know, besides if you took out that I can't buy one secondhand at the moment and there's lithium batteries involved and all of that, if you took out those things and decided that that was a better idea for the planet, I couldn't afford one. That's not something that's doable for me. But what I can do is I can use my petrol car and I can really think about where I'm going. And when I think about where I'm going, I can think, who can I take with me? Or what extra job could I do? When I have packaging, I can think about, well, how am I going to use this? When I want to buy a new phone, you know, I've owned my phone for about the last 3 years. I don't intend to get a new one, but I can see in the future that I'll need a new phone. I'm not going to amass a ton of guilt around that because I live in this particular world. What I am going to do is I'm going to talk to phone companies and I'm going to talk to my local council around how do I recycle all these bits of phone? And that can be as simple as a call. Hey, g'day, my name's Liz. I live on Philp Mountain Road and I'm just inquiring if you've got a mobile phone battery recycling. And most councils have got the obligation to record that call happened. And I reckon if a bunch of us did that, that'd be it. Another idea, because it can really get terribly overwhelming, is pick 3 things that you want to change and just do that. And then be okay with that, because burnout is real and you guys are far too lovely to get too worried about. Beauty. Well, I think have we got another question?
No. How long have we got? I should know this.
Yeah, you should know this. I wasn't watching.
5:13. So do we have to wrap up?
I really think so.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how long we've got.
The dissociated voice from the cloud.
The spirit is talking.
Technically, it's a 45-minute session, but there are no sessions afterwards. So if you want to wrap up, you can wrap up. Or if other people have questions, please feel free to continue with questions. I had one quick little sneaky question.
That'd be great. James, you're welcome.
Just whether or not, and I noticed it with the slow fashion segment that you were talking about, that it has quite a good focus on the consumption side of it. And do you think there's, do you find there's much of a distinction in the work that you do between the consumption and the disposal side of things, as in different focuses, or does it all kind of come together as one way of looking at things?
I don't think many people have their heads around product life cycles. Most people don't know where their bits come from. They don't know where their tin of coconut milk is. They couldn't point to Thailand on a map if they tried, you know, let alone where the tin for that tin of coconut milk came from. So that's one part of the puzzle. But then that second is they spend 2 minutes and they tip it into a curry. And then they look at that and then they don't actually know where that can goes afterwards. So I think starting to have conversations around product life cycles and that everything has a beginning before it gets to the shops and everything has an end after it leaves your house, I think is a really important one. Please don't for a moment think that the biggest wasters, the biggest consumers or the biggest polluters are big business. They're not households, they're not schools, they're not governments even, they're big business. And we still don't have a proper understanding of that full product life cycle. And I think that can be a real challenge, especially when not even when I'm talking to adults, but I was going to say, especially when I'm talking to kids, to first have that narrative. Once we need to get language around it before you start talking about, well, with the disposal of this thing comes, I think. I do a lot around legislative change for plastics and looking at getting labels on packaging, you know, that are actually meaningful. You know, like most people do think, you know, if I was, well, in Beaudesert at least, if I ask, you know, 1 and 2, does this mean recycle, that little resin index? They're like, yeah, that means that plastic is recyclable.
Can you actually recycle that?
It depends on your council. Absolutely. You can generally recycle 1 to 5 and 4 generally, but there are still hundreds of other plastics. Nobody can recycle number 7.
Is there a resource online which shows me council by council what numbers?
No, there's not. But if you go ask your local council, they'll be able to tell you.
But there's no
there's
database across like Queensland that I can.
It just changes.
It
so
changes,
there has been them,
yeah,
but it's now out of date. So if you want reliable information, you need to go to your council. And stuff in that space, you know, plastic pollution in the last 5 years, it's gone nuts. And unfortunately, it's a bit depressing as it may be, we actually have more plastic production now than we did 5 years ago. So we need to get our thinking around what legislation do we need to support responsible consumption of plastic? What ideas do we need to start creating to value our plastic? James, did that answer what you asked?
Yeah, I think
what
you were just saying then about, you know, responsible consumption as being, you know, as another way of not getting too overwhelmed, I guess, with the disposal side of things of you know, what am I going to do with this? It's kind of like, what can I purchase differently, or how can I, you know, make different choices in what I'm consuming that will change the outcome of the disposal anyway.
Absolutely. Just think about all the plastic that we use, there are alternatives. You know, we need to start valuing that resource as a magic substance that it is, not as a throwaway disposable commodity.
Yeah.
Take it away. 1 second, James.
No, you go, James.
Okay,
you go.
James, go for it.
Just a quick point. I guess also, if, you know, if recycling and that is council by council, for those of us who live in the Brisbane City Council, it is, I think, the biggest population council in Australia. So,
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's the biggest council. So it's a good one to push in a certain direction because it's going to affect a lot of suburbs if when things change in this one council.
Yeah, fantastic.
I was just going to quickly sort of just put a question. Like, I'm just wondering because with what James was saying with the Brisbane City Council and the recyclables bin in the trucks, and they take it somewhere. So how do we find out, or is there somewhere where we can go to find out what actually happens to those, to the plastic? Where do they take that? And, I know that they don't take them to China anymore, or, that's stopped. So what is happening now with our plastics? And are there any companies that are using, that recycling service or whatever to make new products? Or do we have any information about what locally where our, recyclables are going and what is happening, or are they being made into anything?